Hey YouTube, Awesome Rider here. Welcome to my review for the deluxe Don Onitaijin from Avataro Sentai DonBrothers. I haven't really gone over boxes much in a while, but I just wanted to highlight the front of this box because it has some absolutely amazing artwork. I mean, you can see from the size of this box that the size of this mecha is going to be different, but it really is just awesome artwork, and I just wanted to highlight how just cool it is, honestly. And if you're a box collector or someone that just saves your Sentai boxes or collection boxes, it's nice to have that. Honestly, I might even try to find a place to display this somewhere, just for this year even, just because I think it's really cool and I wanted to highlight that. And also, before we get started, does anyone want to get out? No. But before we get started, there's also a special avatar gear we're going to take a look at that's a bonus with this. And also before we get started, I want to remind you guys to like this video if you enjoyed it and hit that subscribe button and that bell button to get notifications for more toy reviews, video like this, and more. Alright, so here's our gear. Overall, par for the course stuff. You know, pretty neat looking for what these are. They've kind of grown on me a little bit. Now let's go ahead and do the sounds. So those are overall the two main sounds. Honestly, pretty neat, pretty unique. We also have the attack sounds. Alright, but now we've heard the main stuff, let's get on to the actual main review. Alright, so here we have everybody together, out of box now, here to start the main review. And I have to say, they actually look pretty good as a group. Like, I'm going to be going over them individually, and I have my overall thoughts, but I wanted to give kind of just a thought of them as a group. And I'll say that individually, they do look a little bit cheaper and don't look as cool as it is overall together, which I guess is mostly the case. But I think they definitely feel weaker as individuals, though there is strong points. And seeing them together, it's actually kind of a cool looking group, and is almost this kind of mix between something modern and a little bit nostalgic, where you have the mecha coming together and it's kind of this modern thing of a more articulated mecha, but this group here as individuals looks more like your classic Sentai mech lineup, a little bit more blocky, and like even though you want it to be better, it's almost overall nostalgic. But I'm going to take a look at them each individually, highlighting them. Okay, so we're starting with red, which is like the centerpiece, and I overall like the design. I think that this definitely has more of a classic mech toy feel to it. If you want a more articulated, accurate version for this guy in particular, though they are doing a figure of it, and who knows, maybe they'll do other figures down the road. Part of me kind of wishes it was kind of an articulated, like, show-accurate version of this guy in addition to being a show-accurate mecha. But it's fine for what it is. My main problem overall with some of these, even though I like a lot of the end result, is they feel a little bit cheaper. The Sentai mech plastic and like mechanisms have felt just cheaper than when I started collecting, where it's kind of a hard feeling to describe, but I think some people might know what I'm talking about when you get it out of the package and it feels like, oh yeah, this was worth the money, and they've definitely felt cheaper. Honestly, this isn't necessarily a dig at them or anything, but it feels more akin to the Hasbro or Bandai America products. Again, this isn't a, oh my god, Super Sentai superior thing, but it's like, the price you're paying for this is higher than those, so it's weird for this to feel more like a $20 product than it does a $60+ product. Otherwise, though, you know, if you kind of just look at this as your classic Sentai mech toy and don't expect it to look like the articulated, sort of sleek version you're going to get for the combined mode, it looks overall fine. My only main problem / weirdness with it is with the feet. They look so tiny, and it's really funny because you have these little bits here that move for transformation, and it's just like, really? That's making it stable? But it is, I guess, which is kind of funny. Also, the helmet is stored back here, and it can be really loose. Like, this is frequently coming off. It might just be mine, but like, if I like breathe, the the wrong way, this will fly off of there, which can be kind of annoying. You do have little bits of articulation like in here because of the transformation, like the leg articulation is here, so you have that, and you can bend the knees a little bit there. You're not going to be able to get it as naturally as in the mecha, and you can move the head as well. You're not going to be able to get it like as full and naturally as the main mecha, but just for the purposes of this, you have a little bit going on there. So we're gonna go for yellow here now. Honestly, I feel it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I think she definitely looks a little bit cheap. She almost looks like a mecha Nutcracker figure, if you think about those Nutcracker figures from PR. But it actually doesn't look as bad as I thought it did in the initial images. It's just kind of weird because like her and Red are probably the most like articulated feeling, and Red has a little bit more of that look because he's kind of more spread out, whereas she's just kind of constricted here. But it does look a little bit sleeker in person and a little bit cooler, and you do have the ability to move the head, which is kind of nice, and it gives a little bit of personality. So it does look a little bit better than I thought. You do have a lot of clunky stuff there, and it's kind of funny because like when this comes all together, it looks really cool and modern and like this next step in Sentai Mech evolution, but these are very much classic Sentai Mech pieces, and they do like feel a little bit cheaper. That's kind of been a trend amongst Sentai in the last few years, and I kind of wish personally that yellow and red were able to be articulated as well, just like the main mecha and going into it, but I understand why that's not the case. Maybe they'll do some figures for it later on. Alright, then we have Blue here, who actually also houses some of the articulation. You can actually move his head a little bit, which also gives it a nice little bit of personality. Like, just being able to have him look at the camera in this way is just kind of neat. But because the arms have the articulation in them, you do have a little bit of that pre-articulation, so you can get some kind of personality out of him. That's like, hang 10, dude! I don't know what's going on there, but I think that's kind of cool. And the legs move too back here because of transformation, but you do have a little bit of options there, and I think he's actually one of the stronger looking ones in certain ways. You also have this ab piece here, which is separate when you get it. Like, I think it was even individually plastic wrapped, unless I'm remembering that wrong, but you put it right here. I'm only highlighting that because I think it's funny that these are multi-purpose abs within the context of this toy transformation. And then we have Black Rangers here, which while I do like the design of it, I think is probably the weakest and cheapest looking one overall. Like, it just is so kind of blocky, and it's got that cheap feel. It feels really light. There's not a lot going on. I mean, to be fair, there's not a lot going on in the design either. And it's weird too here because this foot tail simultaneously works and also seems lazy. It's not like it's a deal breaker or I'm like, oh, don't buy this toy because of this filth. But it's like, yeah, it definitely feels like the cheapest and kind of worst looking quality wise to me of the bunch. You can move the legs a little bit and stuff though because of the nature of transformation, but that's not exactly going to give you poses outside of it looking like he broke his legs, which is just kind of sad. Then we have Pink here, which actually is almost exactly split down the middle of, I don't like the way the gray plastic looks, and I think it makes it look a little bit cheaper, but I really do like the pink translucent plastic because I think it makes it stand out and it has this really cool kind of futuristic techie look. So I do like the design of it, but it's like the toy itself feels split down the middle between feeling cheap and feeling kind of cool. But overall, I think it looks fine. You know, I always wonder like what people are buying this for. I mean, obviously you're buying it to make the Megazord, but like I'm curious about how many people buy it like to display or use the individual modes more often. So like if the individual modes are weaker, does it matter so much to people? But it's not that big of a deal. You can also move the wings here partly because of transformation, but you're not gonna be able to pose it, I guess, like this. Like you probably wouldn't pose it like it's mid-flight. Oh, that didn't even work. You can play like caw-caw. Anyway, let's go ahead and transform. Alright, and here we have the thing all together, and honestly, it looks pretty cool. If I'm being honest, my only two main complaints about it, just overall, is that it has that little bit of a cheap feeling I've been talking about through the review. I just wish it felt more worth the price, kind of like Sentai Mech's used to. It just does feel, again, cheaper, and that there's a possibility that it could break if you move the wrong way. Having had owned it a long time, it could also possibly break, and all that type of stuff. And also the gray plastic in here, it is a little bit darker, and it's not as cheap as some gray plastic I've seen, but I still feel It interrupts the design a little bit, makes it feel like a little bit cheaper. But setting that aside, this thing's still pretty freaking cool. I mean, obviously it's a little bit sleeker than your average Sentai mecha because they're trying to make it articulated. I mean, they did make it articulated, but that's the reason it looks sleeker than your standard block mecha. But even if it wasn't articulated, I really do appreciate the sleeker design of it. I think it makes it look really awesome. Not to mention it's a larger, more impressive size than your standard Sentai mech outside of like bigger combinations later on, which is just really cool. And I really do like the design overall. I like the way it transforms. I think everything fits nicely together. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of like weird leftover like toy version pieces that you usually get. I just really do dig it. Despite some minor complaints, I think it's really awesome. Before we dive into the articulation, I do just want to show a couple quick comparisons before I forget, just size-wise and design-wise and all that. So here he is, just for size comparison, next to the Enyaridon mech, the only other main mech in the series right now, just to get an idea for scale. I mean, depending on the Sentai series, you'll have a different scale comparing it to the previous series, but this one is basically in scale with Zenkaiger as well. But you get an idea for like standard versus this one, and you can see like it's basically almost half the size, like I'm saying almost. And in regards to the plastic feel, it's weird because this also feels a little bit cheaper and kind of loose, and that's something that I had a problem with the Zenkaiger ones, but this one does feel a little bit more solid. I feel this one almost has a glossier look that makes it look a little bit more high-end, if that makes any sense, but this one feels more solid in terms of the quality feel. And just because, I know this is a weird one to compare it to in a way, but because both Sentai and PR have been doing articulated mech, here it is next to the PR main T-Rex Champion Zord in its warrior mode there. Obviously, you know, this is going to be a little bit different if you combine it with the large mode, and it's going to kind of tower up and compare it to this. But I wanted to compare these two because it's basically the same scale of like a main Megazord release. I mean, I know that this doesn't have pink and blue on it, but it's not going to add any height to it. But I thought it was just interesting to compare. And I will say that just talking about quality of feel, first of all, between these two, because people are going to talk about that, especially since I've been talking about the quality of the plastic. I would say that the plastic quality on the Sentai version does feel better, but this one honestly isn't that bad. There is some problems with the Hasbro one, for some people being brittle in certain instances, but Sentai mechas are no stranger to that. I've seen Sentai mecha in the last 7 years, maybe even a decade, become brittle over time or snap if you apply the wrong force. Fortunately, I only had one piece break on my collections here for this, and it was because of an accident where my hand slipped and it smashed together, and it was a level of force which you normally wouldn't use, but I have seen people break this. All I want to say with that, just to wrap it up, is the plastic here does feel more solid, less cheap, less breakable, but it's not impossible. There are times that this sometimes will fall apart when you're transforming it in certain areas. I feel, when I'm transforming it, I feel if you did apply too much force in certain areas, it could break. It's not immune to that. It is a higher quality plastic, but this one isn't as bad as I think people make it seem, and I think it need not be a war. I think it's cool that both Hasbro, Bandai, Power Rangers, and Sentai are starting to give us more accurate, articulated mech. I think that's cool. In regards to the articulation, I'm going to go over it here in just a minute, but they basically have all the same points of articulation. You have like the ball joint on the head, you have the arms are able to move, you'll have an elbow joint, you'll have the swiveling on the fists, you'll have the legs. These leg joints are really weird on it though, they kind of come out like this, whereas this is more of a traditional ball joint. You'll have the knees bend, both of them have ball joints on the foot here. This one doesn't really have the same type of waist articulation because the only waist articulation it has is because of the transformation, so that is one area this one has something different with. But for the most part, like 90%, it's the same points of articulation, they're just done in a different mold. And some of them, like on this one, will feel more right, and some of them on this one will feel more right, depending on your style and preference. Now to actually go over the articulation, you do have a little bit of a ball joint on the leg here. Now it's a little bit like sort of stiff when you're working with it, and it'll just kind of come in and out, and it can't go as far out as you want it. It's almost more forward and back and a little bit out. And I would be careful because sometimes when you apply too much pressure, these will pop off. For this one on the left leg here, if I apply too much pressure trying to pop it out, sometimes the leg would pop off. But you do have that going on there. And like I said, it's much more of a normal looking joint than those weird little joints we just saw on that guy. You do have knee articulation there, which is really nice. As mentioned, there's a little bit of a joint here on the foot, a different type of ball joint, but you do get the side-to-side movement, and you can move this a little bit because of the transformation. Same thing here, though. You do have a nice little joint on the foot. You can have waist articulation here, and like I said, that's one thing this has over the Power Rangers one because it's not part of transformation. You do have the ability to move the arms around. These will get in your way a little bit and pop off like that. You have the elbow joint right there. You can swivel the fist as well. It's on a nice little joint there. Obviously, have head and neck articulation. I would say that this one is a little bit superior as well for the Sentai one, comparing it to the P articulation, because it's not tethered to a key, so it makes it look a little bit cooler. And like you can raise the head a little bit higher, which like just that. Pretend this doesn't even have articulation. Just being able to have that looking up to the stars look is just really awesome. And I mentioned that in past reviews of figures and mecha. When it's even just able to move its head, it gives it so much more personality, which is really nice. Obviously, too, you can take these and they can become sword weapons, and the hands actually open up kind of like those old school PR Sentai figures. I mean, I don't think PR and Sentai was the only one to do that, but there was those old school figures that had the hands that opened up. Sometimes there was a little peg in there, but they actually fit in fairly securely. Oh, they're kind of going the wrong way. It doesn't matter. Like, either way, it's going to be a sword, but that's really cool as well. I have to say, overall, I really do dig this thing. It's not perfect. I have my nitpicks that I've mentioned with a little bit of the cheap feeling and the cheap look in some instances, but overall, it's still pretty freaking cool. And I think it's really cool to see this evolution of Sentai Mech, see this continue to evolve as we head into like further releases for this series and later series. And I would say that if you're a fan of the series, if you're a fan of this mecha design, I can definitely recommend checking it out. I think it's pretty cool, pretty solid. I love being able to have an articulated mecha. As always, I give this advice no matter how much you want something. I would maybe wait for a little bit of a sale because, you know, it is a little bit pricier than your standard Sentai mech compared to like, you know, something like Zenkaio and stuff like that. So that's something to be aware of. I'm not saying it doesn't feel worth it, but I would say that I would be more comfortable recommending it at an even cheaper price. But I still think it's definitely worth checking out and a pretty cool and exciting release for Sentai, especially as a longtime mecha collector and fan. That's about it for this one though, guys. Until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you can get notifications for all my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing